morally bankrupt if you understood this bill and the reasoned amendment and wanted to vote in favour of the reasoned amendment. Well, I'm not sure that's a fair statement to make, but Mike Tapp says you either didn't understand what happened in Parliament or you're morally bankrupt, giving two alternate options for that. So I'm going to tear that apart somewhat in this video without taking a stance for or against. I'm just going to explain why I think that statement is not the correct one to make. Now, I've done some videos on this bill and whatever, so I won't go into full detail in that. I'll link my other video in the description below, but I will go into it a little bit. But first of all, you'll also find a version of this video over on X, so please do go follow me there as well. I'd like to build a following on there as well. But if you're new to me, I'm Daniel Shunsmith, the Barrister of England and Wales, and I think it's really important to understand and explain law in very simple terms, because I quite frankly think the law's got so complex, so convoluted, the system is so long, difficult to navigate for many people. Quite frankly, I'm amazed that private legal services are not considered essential so that they still attract VAT. I think they are essential because, with respect, how can everybody possibly understand all of the law, all the procedure, all the rules, and follow this without some assistance? So if you want some assistance in hopefully very straightforward terms, please do subscribe to the channel. I thank you all so much for 700,000 subscribers. And not just for the 700,000 subscribers, but for all of the lovely messages that have come in to congratulate me on 700k. It's all down to you and thanks to you, because I'm independent. I have no one else telling me what to record or what to film or anything. I'm just me. So I depend on you. So thank you for that. So let's come back to this morally bankrupt statement about people being morally bankrupt. I do object to this. Now, I try to stay neutral on this channel as much as I can. I don't always succeed, but we all have our views and we shouldn't be criticised for having our views. We should just, that's a democracy, isn't it? If you've got polar opposite views, you can still get along. You've just got different views to each other. That's just the world we should live in. But Mike Tapp said, either you don't understand what happened in Parliament yesterday with this bill that had a reasoned amendment which called upon the government to do a national inquiry into the grooming gangs scandal, right? So the reasoned amendment included that. Mike Tapp says you either don't understand what happened or you're happy for a bill containing some measures to protect children to fall down, or you do completely understand and you're using abused children to score political points. I don't agree with that. I don't think you should make statements like that. I mean, saying that you are morally bankrupt if you understand what happened and voted against, voted for this reasoned amendment, or would have voted if you were an MP, would have voted for this reasoned amendment with the changes in it. I don't think that's the correct thing to say. Right, so let's break down exactly what was said, because let me bring this screenshot onto screen here, because some people have made comments as well, and by people I mean MPs, have made comments that there was, well, first of all, that there was no inclusion of a call for a national inquiry in this reasoned amendment. Well, there was. That MP highlighted this bit in purple here that says that it declines to give a second reading to the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill because... Now, he left it at that. He left that highlighted bit and said that that's just the bit that shot down this bill. Now, just to very quickly recap, I've done this in more detail in other videos, so I'll do this very quickly. This had its first reading, which was a very superficial, not superficial, is a very straightforward, almost a formality, no vote, no debate, just a first reading of the bill, and then it goes to the second reading. Now, before the second reading, there can be what we call a reasoned amendment. That is, the opposition might say, well, actually, we don't agree with the bill in its current form. A bill is a draft piece of legislation, so a new proposed law. The opposition might say, we have reasoned amendments. We have reasons why we would amend this bill so that it doesn't go forward in its current form. So we need changes before we can agree for it to move forward. That's what it really means. Yes, it can kill the bill in its current form. Many bills just never proceed after that, because if it's so fundamentally flawed, then it obviously is just shot down and has no way of going forward. Because let's say that there was an idea for a new road marking. Okay, let's say, 5 solid red lines on a new road. And someone said, well, that's fundamentally flawed because we already have legislation that comprehensively deals with that. We don't need it. Obviously, there's no way to amend that to comply with the arguments against it. Does that make sense? So if it already has law to deal with it, and the amendment and the reasoned amendment is we don't need it because we've already got substantial laws that deal with that, that effectively kills the bill, because there's no way for it to go forward by amending it to comply with that and still have the substance of what it's sought to achieve. This is obviously more complicated than that, but there's nothing to say they couldn't amend the bill, reintroduce it, still have everything they wanted, but incorporate some of the changes that they wanted here. And that's where it gets interesting, because yes, it would take time, etc. But that's where it gets interesting, because that MP said that this did not include a call for a national inquiry, which it did. I underlined it, and I replied to the post on X. It's a bit entertaining on X. Do go and follow me over there. So I underlined it, the final bit, and said, and calls upon the government to develop a new legislative proposal for children's well-being, including establishing a national statutory inquiry into historical exploitation, focusing on these gangs. Words omitted for YouTube. So I underlined it. It does include that. But then someone else said, well, after the first bit, he said it declines to give a second reading. He said, therefore, the rest of it is irrelevant. Well, I fundamentally disagree, because the rest of it is absolutely 100% the substance of why this reasoned amendment declined to give a second reading to this bill, which by majority Labour vote, they voted down this reasoned amendment. So this is a nullity anyway. But this is really, as I said, tying in with Mike Tapp saying you either don't understand it or 2 and 3 are morally bankrupt. But that's wrong, with respect, because the word because actually is important here. Now, unironically, since we're talking about schools, this comes down to basic grammar, reading, understanding, and I don't mean to insult anyone's intelligence, and I'm not teaching you to suck eggs, but interestingly, this is an important point, because it's about grammar and the reading and the understanding. And when we read law, certain clauses have an and, so A and B must be correct. So, for example, the elements of theft, the dishonest appropriation of property belonging to another with the intention to permanently deprive. Each of those are separate elements, and they are and elements. It's not or. So it's not like dishonest appropriation or something else, a property belonging to another. It's and. They all need to exist. So law can either read and, or it can read or. So there can be an alternative, or there can be collective elements that need to come together. And interestingly enough, massive tangent. This is a big distinction between schools. Now, this will divide opinion somewhat, so I warn you, don't shoot the messenger. These are conversations that I've had with people. I've had conversations with people that don't understand what a semicolon's function is. They don't understand what a comma function is. They don't understand different words of the English language that have different letters. For example, I'll put them on screen while I'm talking in the edit. Practice, practice, and practicing. Practice is obviously in the current form with a C is a noun. So a doctor's practice, as in the building, the establishment of a practice, or a lawyer's practice, their practice is a noun. It is their practice. Rather, with an S, is the verb. So practice, to practice law, to practice medicine, practicing something. And on another note, people might understand practicing as in you're still trying to get good at something, or you're still trying to qualify as something. So whereas a practicing lawyer is someone who is qualified, is authorized, and is practicing law. It doesn't mean that they are not yet qualified, doesn't mean they're not yet good at it, doesn't mean they haven't finished their study or whatever. They are practicing law. So they are a practicing lawyer or a practicing doctor. So again, with respect, many people don't understand these terms. But all of these terms and grammar and structure and everything else, they are taught very differently. The experience of being taught these in different schools is vastly different. So between state schools in the old comprehensive style and the new style academies and grammar schools, and then to private schools, etc., they all have different standards of teaching. They all have different grades of teaching. Hopefully they have the ability to split children into classes that can grasp these concepts. Whereas, with the greatest respect, if you had a class of 100 children, Some at the lower level of intelligence will not be able to grasp all of these concepts, whereas some at the very top end of that will have just picked it up from their parents or whomever without even being taught by the school. And everything across that spectrum. We can't expect everybody to have the same level of understanding. At the same time, some that may not be academic in nature may be very sporty, and vice versa. But all of this is important. And the reason for all of that long-winded way of talking about that is that this comes back to this point, which is really, really important. Somebody said that everything after the bit in purple, which was not highlighted by me at the top there, the purple bit, not the blue bit, someone said that everything after this was irrelevant. And I suggest that's fundamentally misconceived, because everything after that is essential rather than irrelevant. It is precisely why it justifies why they fought to decline to give a second reading. And it's not just about the call for a national inquiry. I suggest that was probably tacked on, and I agree it was probably a political move, and I agree that this was probably never going to go anywhere. They probably knew that this would be voted down anyway, so they tagged it on probably to call media attention to this issue. Now, is it morally bankrupt? Here's a question. Now, I'm not taking a stance or a view here. I'm posing this as a question so that we can think about this in this way. Is it morally bankrupt to use what has happened to draw attention to what has happened for whatever reason and whatever purpose? Because the net result is there is more attention on this stuff that happened, which I suggest absolutely warrants attention. I personally believe it does warrant an inquiry that goes beyond the initial inquiry that was done in 2022. If you want a breakdown of that, check out my learned friend Alan Robertshaw's video, link below. Check that out. He talks about the original inquiry. I think actually perhaps there are reasons that there could be another inquiry. But this is the point. You can have opposing views. But I think they tagged this on to this reasoned amendment. So the understanding of this whole reasoned amendment is really critically important. So whereas some people believe that everything after that purple bit was irrelevant, I starkly disagree. I think everything after that is absolutely critical for the following reason, and I'll explain why. And again, I'm not taking sides, I'm just going to explain why. The bits in red boxes, in fact, there is another one which I missed. So I'm going to put it here so you can see it. That one there. So all the boxes are because. And you'll see just before the boxes of because, with this arrow and this, you've got the semicolon that links each of these things together. And again, I promise you, I'm not insulting your intelligence. This is why, because some people genuinely think all of this is irrelevant, and it's really not. This says it declines to give a second reading, so it will halt the bill in its current form to go forward because, first of all, it says it undermines the long-standing combination of school freedom and accountability that has led to educational standards rising in England, effectively abolishes academy freedoms which have been integral to the success, and is regressive in approach, leading to worse outcomes, that says under there, for pupils. So that is a fundamental disagreement with the bill sections that it refers to. And it's, for example, there's a couple of bits here, the repeal of the duty to make an academy order in relation to a school causing concern. So before this bill, I mean, this bill is not yet law, but so currently a failing school will become an academy with the idea that it's to improve. Now, I grant that there are mixed views on the success of academies. Some people think that they are hugely successful. Some people criticize the success that they've made. I'm sure there's a spectrum there somewhere. But again, this is why it's a democracy. This is why they're different views. It also calls for an extension of statutory pay conditions and arrangement to academy teachers. Now, some of the criticisms for that are that the freedom and the autonomy that academies have to draw in teachers on competitive salaries to get the highest skill possible to improve the school, the academy, as it will become as much as possible, that has the freedom. This suggests that it will curtail that freedom. But then coming back to this, that first bit there led up to this first semicolon. After the semicolon, it says, and, well, it doesn't say and, but it means and, because it ends freedom over teacher pay and conditions, which is the bit that I just talked about, making it harder to attract and retain good teachers. So the argument here, in this reasoned amendment, one of the arguments, is that this bill would end the freedom for academies over teacher pay and conditions, making it harder to attract in and retain good teachers, because at the moment They can offer them competitive salaries. They can try to attract the most talented teachers because they've got the freedom to use competitive salaries. That's another one. But then there's another semicolon at the end of that. And then so it says, and I missed another one out there. So that's this one here that I'm highlighting now, because so it's because it ends the freedom over qualified teacher status, making teacher recruitment harder, and because it removes school freedoms over the curriculum, leading to less innovation, and because repealing the requirements for failing schools to become academies and for all new schools to be academies will undermine school improvement and remove the competition which has led to rising standards, and because the bill will make it harder for schools to expand, reducing parental choice and access to good education. And finally, calls upon the government to develop a new legislative proposal for children's well-being, including establishing a national inquiry into historical child focused on these gangs. So all of those things were reasoned amendments. Now, you may not agree with all of those arguments. You may or you may not. That's the point. But Mike Tapp says, if you understood what happened, as in his point 3, if you completely understand what happened, he says you are using children who've suffered all of this to score political points. Now, granted, some people might be doing that. I mean, it's possible that people are doing that. It's possible that people are just political point scoring here. But I think Labour politicians, I don't think it's unsafe to say, I think some Labour politicians have done political point scoring in the past. For example, repeatedly saying that they will not increase national insurance and they will not increase VAT, whereas they did increase employer national insurance, which is a form of national insurance, which is ultimately paid by the employee, because all product is that ultimately coming from the employee, because without it, nothing happens. And so ultimately, one way or another, it's all paid by the end employee, one way or another. And they attached VAT to private schools when it was not there before. Therefore, it is new to private schools. It is a new tax to private schools. So that's a political point scored, I think, when they were making those campaigns initially to get elected into office. I think that is a political point. So, but according to Mike Tapp, I don't mean to heavily criticize Mike Tapp here. He's politically point scoring here in this post. By way of example, he says, if you completely understand it, you are using these children to score political points. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's the correct thing to say. Now, whether you agree with the bill or not, whether you agree with the amendments or not, is somewhat irrelevant. I don't think it's fair to put people in this category, saying that you either have no idea what's going on or you are happy for this bill to fall down because some elements of it protect children, or you're using it to score political points. You're using those children to score political points, and those two are morally bankrupt. I respectfully suggest that putting people into that category is itself morally bankrupt, because it's essentially saying you fit into one of these categories. You either understand it or you don't, and if you do understand it, you're morally bankrupt. I don't agree with that, but I think that is essential to understanding these things and what's going on, because many people, just with respect, probably don't understand what's going on. All you know is the bottom line, that it was voted out. This reasoned amendment was voted out. And so what you see in the news, you see the headline that the majority of Labour voted against having this national inquiry, which, granted, by itself as a headline is somewhat misleading, because it's not that simple. There's a lot more to it than that, as you probably just gathered from what I've just said. That was tagged on. Now, it was probably, I would hazard a guess, I don't know the process of who drafted this, when and where and how, but I would hazard a guess that this was probably bolted on at some stage as part of a, well, here are all our objections to this bill, and we'll throw this on for measure to attract publicity to it. Now, is it morally bankrupt to do that? No, because whether you're using it for political point scoring or not, that is kind of what MPs are elected to do. Political point scoring is an MP getting attention, getting publicity, making their views and voices heard. And if it takes something like this to get national and international media and social media attention on it, that's what they're doing. And it's working, because it's working. All of these news companies are talking about it. I'm talking to you about it. So it has brought attention to these issues. Whether they go ahead with the inquiry or not, it has absolutely shone a spotlight on things that absolutely need to be discussed. And I'm seeing more and more, not just media and journalists, but more and more lawyers talk about this. Many more people of influence talking about this. And these are things that need to be discussed. So there it is. I thought that was necessary because there's a lot of criticism you might see, and I'd like you to understand it. That's my job on this channel, helping you to understand law and as it applies to news and current events and politics and so on. So I hope you found that interesting. Do leave me your thoughts and comments. Criticisms, if you like, so long as you're not rude. There's no need to be rude. You can disagree with someone and leave views of contradictions without being rude. Not many of you are rude, I'm pleased to say. Most of you are very supportive. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.